Good evening, my little Pip. How was your day? I hope it was great. Your last comment on my last video was so sweet. It almost made Big Sis blush. I got a book that goes more into Greek mythology, by the way. I can't wait to read your more coomer stories. I might even do a stream for that, so look out for that, okay? Tonight though, we are visiting ancient Mesopotamia, with its tales about the origin of their gods and their journeys. Do you know where Mesopotamia was located? No worries, me neither until now. Mesopotamia was located in the region of Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and housed the beginnings of human civilization. A lot of important inventions have their origin in this ancient land, from the concept of time, math, writing, and even the wheel, to name a few. A very important place. So are you excited to hear about the crazy stories Mesopotamians came up with? I surely am. So let's get comfy and have a good time, okay? Oh no, not this one. This one. Mesopotamia may not have had the world's earliest myths, but it was almost certainly the first place where myths were written down. The Sumerian people invented cuneiform writing there. The script was being used to bring tales of legend out of the oral tradition. The stories that the Sumerians and their Akkadian successors in what is now southern Iraq recorded told of the epic activities of a multiplicity of rival gods. Some deities may have originated as elemental forces, but others were associated with specific towns where their statues were cared for and venerated in temples. In a world of competing city-states, the statues of individual divinities rose and fell with the fortunes of the locals they represented. The myths recounted the gods' rivalries, which sometimes set son against father in intergenerational strife, as happened in the ruling dynasties of the day. Chief among the elemental forces was the sky god An or Anu. Other important figures included the storm god Enlil, who was also connected with agricultural fertility, the goddess Inanna, linked with both sexuality and war, and the divine craftsman Enki, treated in one Sumerian poem both as a creator deity and a culture hero, responsible for blessing the world with bountiful harvests, as well as the arts of building and weaving. Creation myths seem to have varied from city to city across the Mesopotamian plain. Today, the best known is the one contained in the epic poem, known from its opening words as the Enuma Elish, literally when on high. Dating perhaps from as early as 1900 BCE, but written down in its present form around 1100. It was effectively a work of propaganda celebrating Marduk, the city god of Babylon. Even relatively unimportant centers, however, like the otherwise obscure Duno, had origin stories of their own. Ritual life revolved around festivals in which the god statues were paraded outside the temples that were their homes. Sometimes the images were borne on barges along the waterways that were the main thoroughfares of Mesopotamia. The region name translates as the land between rivers, referring to its two great arteries, the Tigris and Euphrates. One such progress is celebrated in the story of the moon god Nanna's journey from Ur to Nippur. Mesopotamia may have been first to write down its myths, but many other areas of the Middle East, Fertile Crescent, had traditions of their own. The names of the gods differ from land to land, but in other respects, neighboring mythologies often reflect common themes. One such body of myth came to light only after 1928, when a farmer in Syrian village of Ras Shamra uncovered an ancient tomb. Subsequent investigation turned up the remains of the ancient port city of Ugarit, part of the culture known to Old Testament scholars as Canaanite. Among the discoveries were thousands of inscribed clay tablets, some containing mythological material. The principal May days of Ugarit were the sky god Al and the storm god Baal, quite as hot-blooded as his Mesopotamian equivalent Enlil, as the story of his challenge to Mut shows. Inanna's counterpart was Anat, who, like her Sumerian cousin, was associated not just with sexual fertility, but also with bloodshed. She in turn has been linked with the goddess Astarte, known across the Middle East in early classical times. Another link was provided by the Hittites of Anatolia, at the Fertile Crescent's northernmost tip. Their storm deity Tesub ruled the heavens as a mighty but unpredictable tyrant who needed to be constantly appeased by his earthly subjects. His duties included looking after the welfare of the sun god Semige, whose activities were as vital as Tesub's rainmaking to the well-being of Hittite farmers struggling to raise crops in a sun-parched land. If you have watched my last video about the Egyptian myths, which you should definitely do, you might have noticed some similarities between the Egyptian way of handling their gods and the Mesopotamian way. The first similarity is that every city had its own main god, and the gods rose and fell depending on how well the city was doing it resigned in. The second similarity is that every god lived in a temple within their god statue, which the priest of that temple took care of. Furthermore, we learned that a lot of myths are sharing common themes, just with different god names. Greece and Rome are also an example of that. I'm actually wondering right now, are all or most myths true? Because a lot of people believed in them, right? So there must be something real about them. I don't think it's just mouth-to-mouth transmission or something, you know? I don't believe that. I think some of these myths actually have some truth in them. What is different though about Mesopotamia is that every town had its own god origin story, as a form of propaganda that they are the best city basically and loved by the gods. Our first tale for tonight is such an origin story that took place in Duno. The gods of Duno. In order to create and dominate the world, the gods resorted to incest and predicide. This common mythological motive appears in the Mesopotamian tale that explains the origin of the gods. A minor city called Duno provides a backdrop to this dramatic story. In the beginning, there was the plough and the earth. From their union, they created the sea. Soon after, the cattle god and the eternal city of Duno came into being. The cattle god then made love to his mother, the earth, killed his father, the plough, and married his sister, the sea. The same pattern was repeated in the following generation. The cattle god's son, the god of flocks, likewise killed his father and married his mother, the sea. For generation after generation, a series of male gods, some of them named after the flocks and herds which roamed the land, killed their fathers and married their sisters or mothers, who often represented features of the landscape such as river, tree, or meadow. Although many details remain obscure, the story can be interpreted as representing the changes of the seasons during the year, each one killing or replacing the previous one. Eventually, however, the pattern altered dramatically. One of the gods, instead of killing his father so that he could take over his dominion and marry his mother, merely imprisoned him. This happened at New Year, celebrated by the Babylonians during April, which might suggest that this song was recited at the New Year festival. But because the rest of the text is missing, the significance of this interruption in the cycle of praticides has been obscured. This move reinforces the general impression given by the Enuma Elish that creation stories were often highly politicized and that they served to glorify a particular city by giving it a pivotal role in the story. In this version of creation, as each god is killed, he is laid to rest in Duno, a city that was dearly loved by each dead god. Thus, the birth of the word is closely linked to the establishment of the most important social and political institution of all, the city. Oh man, these gods really had an incest party going on. I was doing some research about incest at royal families or outside of it. As we know from the Egyptian myths, incest was prohibited between normal mortals but was allowed between pharaohs and their families, because they were human descendants from the gods. So I wanted to know if that's the same for Mesopotamian as well. I couldn't find anything about that though, sadly. One source stated that it was strictly forbidden, and others say that there was no proper rule for it. But my source was also just Reddit. I couldn't find anything properly about it. So yeah. Before the Enuma Elish, where Marduk is the central figure of creation and regulation, his father Enki was it before. Our next myth will be about him, Enki, the creator of the world order. Enki blessed the cities of Nippur, the place where the gods are born, Ur-Meluha and Dilmu, with abundant crops, flocks, precious metals, and success in war. Then he organized the sea, rivers, clouds, and rain, turning the barren hills into fields and creating the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, by filling their beds with a stream of his own semen. He made the sheep, cattle, and crops multiply, and established the skills of building and weaving. As Anki created each domain, he appointed a god to supervise it. But when he had finished, Inanna came to him, complaining that he had failed to give her a domain. She described the realm of Nintu, the womb goddess, Nidaba, the goddess of surveying, and Nanshi, the goddess of the fisheries, and asked plaintively, "As for me, the holy Inanna, what is my domain?" Anki responded by listing the numerous powers and dominions which Inanna did indeed have, adding each time, "Young Inanna, what more could we add for you?" He reminded her of her dominion not only of the shepherd's crook and staff, but of the bloody business of battle and certain kinds of cloth and musical instruments that were linked to war, death, and funeral rites as well. Anki concluded that Inanna's domain was substantial, and finally he told her, "Inanna, you have the power to destroy what cannot be destroyed, and to set up what cannot be set up." Inanna, the complaining goddess, shows human envy here. So again, gods are shown with human characteristics. While this day is quite tame in comparison to the other one, you can get a proper message out of this. To look around and be aware of what you have before you compare yourself to others and or complain. At least this is what I get out of it. Will I do it though? Hopefully. Our next myth will be about Enki again, and his son Ninota, the god of thunderstorm, the flood, and the plow. Arrogant Ninota. To Enki's horror, the formidable Anzu bird stole the precious table of destinies from his custody. Ninota attacked the bird and made him drop the tablet back into the Apsu, Enki's watery domain. Enki was delighted and praised Ninota as the great conqueror of Anzu, saying that his name would be honored forever. But Ninota was not satisfied with this blessing. He decided that he wanted to take over the whole universe, and the key to this plan lay with the Tablet of Destinies, which bestowed supreme power on its holder. But Enki guessed what was in Ninota's heart. As a warning, he stood up the waves of his Apsu and sent his minister Izimu to see his son. But Ninota's arrogance was so great that he even dared to raise his hand against Izimu. This was too much for Enki. In exasperation, he molded some clay from the Apsu to form a turtle. Giving it life, he set it to work scraping out a deep pit with its strong claws. When the Ninota continued to threaten him, Anki retreated gradually toward the trap. Suddenly, the turtle came out from behind him and seized Ninota, while Anki gave him a shove into the pit. Ninota was unable to climb out of the hole. Anki stood on the edge of the pit and looked down at Ninota far below, where he was still being clawed by the turtle. "You were planning to kill me," he mocked loudly. "You with your big ideas. You have tamed mountains and now you can't even climb out of a pit dug by a turtle. What kind of a hero are you?" Fortunately for Ninota, his mother Ninhursagha saw what was happening. She stopped to reprimand Enki and reminded him of a time she had saved his life when he had eaten poisonous plants. "What about you, you plant eater?" she demanded. "I saved you, so now save your son." The Tablet of Destinies comes into play here. Names like this just really intrigue me for some reason. They have such a mystical and powerful aura around them, don't you think? It sounds like, though, that it's more like a document that makes you into the ruler of the universe. Kinda like the crown for the king, but doesn't enhance the god's power. The answer bird that stole the tablet from Enki is a lesser divinity or even a monster. It was depicted as a massive bird who can breathe fire and water. Sometimes it's a lion-headed eagle. Anki got outplayed by a lesser being. GG. Imagine that. What I also notice is that the children of the gods are kinda disrespectful towards their parents. We have that in this tale, but also in the Enuma Elish and the Dunu origin story. And only in this tale so far the child got actually punished for their arrogance. What I also find interesting to note is that Enki in the tale before seemed like a wise old father figure to Inanna, but in this he actually behaves quite childish himself when he mocked his son for falling into his trap. It's a nice touch that he gets reminded to not be arrogant himself, because he also made stupid decisions when he was younger. What do you think? Our next tale is about a possible real-life Ridgeway, where god statues were ferried around to receive blessings outside of their hometowns. A bountiful harvest. In the springtime, a barge bearing the year's first yield of dairy produce would set out from the city of Ur. At the city of Nippur, the goods would be exchanged for produce made by the herders of the south around Ur and those of cultivators in the north around Nippur. The patron god of Ur was the moon god Nanna, also called Suen or Sin. In the mythical version of this ritual, Nanna decided to visit his parents Enlil and Ninlil at Nippur. He sent men to all the corners of the earth to gather materials for building a barge, and rejoiced as they returned one by one with precious cargoes of exotic woods. Nanna then prepared a rich array of gifts for his parents and set off on his journey. On the way upstream, Nanna stopped at 5 different cities. At each stop, the patron goddess of the city, seeing his abandoned cargo, would welcome him and press him to stay. But at each stop he refused, saying, "I am going to Nippur." Finally, the barge docked at the Cray site in Nippur, and Nanna announced the full list of his offerings to his father's storekeeper, who was delighted and opened the gates to the temple. Enlil was similarly overjoyed by his son's arrival and staged a banquet, offering him his best beer. In return for his herder's gifts, Nanna asked Enlil for a blessing and some produce from the local fields. Enlil gave him all that he asked for, and in great joy, Nanna took these blessings home to Ur. So in this tale, as far as I understood, the god statue from Ur was put on a ferry with lots of gifts and was shipped to Nippur, where the father of the god statue resided. It sounds almost like a glorified gift exchange now. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was also used to strengthen relationships between the cities. I have so many questions about this rite if I try to understand what actually happened. Did the cities announce their arrival to each other? Did all the cities only travel to Nippur because it was the religious center back then, or did they also travel to other cities? Did Nippur profit from all the gifts by using it for its citizens, or were they really just for their gods? So many questions, but no answers. Our next tale is going to be a little strange. The Sun God and the Fisherman. This fragment of a longer tale, now lost, provides a revealing portrait of relations among the gods, animals, and men, and affords an intriguing glimpse of the Hittites' wry humor as well, as customs surrounding the arrival of new members of the family. Semige the sun god looked down from the sky to see a cow grazing and was filled with desire. Descending to the earth in the form of a young man, he accosted the cow and demanded to know by what right it grazed in his meadow. He then caught the cow and coupled with it, and 9 months later the cow gave birth. Shocked to discover that her calf had only 2 legs, the cow tried to kill and eat it, but the sun god, watching from above, intervened. He seized his son, removed him to safety, stroked him tenderly, and then left him on a grassy mound, surrounded by poisonous snakes as guards. A childless fisherman happened to pass by. He rejoiced to find the baby he had so much longed for, and gave thanks to Semige for his good fortune. He took the child home, where his wife was equally delighted. Even in this moment of joy, however, they saw an opportunity to profit. "Take this child into the bedroom, lie down on the bed and wail," said the fisherman to his wife. "The whole city will hear you and assume that you've given birth. Then one person will bring us bread, another will bring beer, and someone else will bring us fat." Sure enough, the community responded. "The fisherman's wife has had a baby." The cry went up. The town flocked to the couple's house and overwhelmed them with gifts. Again, I have so many questions. Why do gods never take proper care of their half-godlings? If this baby had 2 legs, was it head that of a cow's? Like a reverse centaur? Also, the snakes did a pretty bad job at protecting the child if the fisherman could just take it like this. But if the fisherman didn't go by, would have the child starved to death? These stories, man, I swear. Our next story is about 2 rival gods. Baal, the god of fertility and rainstorms, and Mut, the god of death and the underworld. Defying death. The divine craftsman Kotava suggested a window in the royal palace, and Baal opposed him. Baal was concerned that his daughters, Dew and Mist, would escape from the palace and fly away. Later Baal must have changed his mind and opted to have a window installed, which provoked words of reproach from Kotava. "Did I not tell you, Baal, that you would come back to my words?" The final building did contain a window, but its inclusion was to prove a terrible mistake. Although the opening allowed Baal to manifest his power over fertility by pouring rain onto the earth, it also exposed him to death, who, it was commonly believed, could only enter a house through a window. When Baal returned from a triumphal tour of his kingdom, he decided to open the window by making a gap in the clouds. Shouting through the opening, Baal managed to make the earth below shake as he flung out a defiant challenge to death. "Enemies of Baal, why do you tremble? Will any king or non-king establish himself on this earth where I am sovereign? I alone reign among the gods. I alone feed the multitudes on earth and make them fat." Baal followed up his challenge by sending 2 messengers, Gapan and Uga, down to Mut's realm in the underworld. Baal gave his messengers careful instructions for their dangerous mission. Go down into Dismal, desolate land where Mut reigns, but be careful as you approach him. Don't give him a chance to seize you like lambs in his jaws. Go and tell him I have built my palace of gold and silver. The remainder of his message, like the account of the messenger's journey itself, is lost. But the boastful mention of Baal's splendid new palace with its windows suggests that the town was provocative and led to further confrontations between Baal and death. Why are gods of death always picked on? Makes me want to give them a big sisterly hug and a head pat. So what is the deal between the two? I guess they are rivals because of the opposite roads. One stands for life and the other one for death. In the tale it was written that death comes into homes through windows. But it's not like death tried to get into Baal's castle. Baal was the one that was actively provoking death here. So what is the deal here? I don't really get it. Our next tale is about bloodshed and love. Anat, the bloodthirsty goddess. The goddess Anat, often identified with Astarte, is the Ugaritic form of a deity who was recognized throughout the ancient Near East, despite being associated with both sexual love and fertility. In one story she perpetrates a frenzy of bloodshed which led to numerous deaths. In an episode that can only be described as a digression in the Baal cycle, Anat indulges in two massacres. The tale begins with Anat's extermination of the populations of two neighboring cities. Raising her scythe high above her, she stood astride a pile of severed human heads strewn like reaped corn. With mutilated hands flying around her, she wallowed up to her thighs in human blood. Then she invited an army of soldiers to her palace and slaughtered them as they sat at her dinner table. After calmly rearranging the tables and chairs, she washed and purified herself in Baal's rain and dew. Baal then spoke to Anat of the powers of his rain and its link to human sexuality. Lay out delicious fruits of the earth, he told her. Encourage marriages throughout the land, spread love over the earth. Hasten to me, and I shall tell you something of which the trees speak and the stones whisper, of which the heavens murmur to the earth and the abyss murmurs to the stars. I know the secret of lightning, unknown to humankind. This passage may refer to a sacred marriage or ritualized sexual union between Anat and Baal, which is described in explicit language in other, more fragmentary texts. It has also been suggested that the vicious massacres by the goddess represent a fertility sacrifice. However, the true interpretation of the story remains uncertain. Wowee! I'm equally confused as the book is. Maybe we just don't talk about this one, okay? And we just go on to our last myth for today. It's called Filipino and the Sea God's Daughter. The disappearance of the sun god is a common theme in the Hittite myths. In this tale, the mighty deity is dragged down to the depths of the ocean, resulting in devastation on the land. One day, the sea god found himself quarreling with the sun god. In his fury, the sea god dragged his rival from the sky to hide him away in the ocean depths. With the sun's disappearance, the land was plunged into darkness. This caused the crops to fail, and famine and hardship reigned. The storm god Tezup called to his eldest son Filipino, "You must go to the sea where you will find the sun god. Bring him back so that we can return him to the sky." Filipino obeyed his father and journeyed to the sea. Seeing the young god draw near, the sea god grew afraid and offered Filipino his daughter in marriage, before handing over the kidnapped sun god. Filipino returned to the earth with his bride, and positioned the sun god in the sky. With the sun's light and warmth, the crops grew again, livestock bred, and humankind thrived. But that was not the end. The sea god sent a river with a message to Tisup. Your son Filipino took my daughter away with him as his wife. What bride price are you going to pay me? Tisup turned to the mother goddess Hana for advice. The sea god is demanding his bride price, he told her. Should I give it to him? Hana's response was clear. Of course, she said. Filipino took his daughter. The sea god is entitled to his payment. So Tisup gave the sea god 1,000 cattle and 1,000 sheep, and thus harmony was restored. Wow. I wonder how the sea god's daughter felt in this situation. Your father's giving you away because he's afraid, and then demands presents, pretending that he wanted to give you away anyways. A little bit of a dick move, not gonna lie. Worst dad of the year. What is the sea god even doing with his presents of 1,000 cattle and sheep? It's not like they can swim or breathe underwater anyways. But hey, at least it's a happy ending, I guess. What was your favorite story of tonight? Mine was probably the one of the goddess that killed several people and then mated with that storm god Baal, and I don't know actually. I don't know. I don't let's just end for today, okay? Thank you very much for listening. I hope you had a good time. Next week we will leave the sunny and warm south and make our way to the cold, rainy north, also called Northern Europe. Sleep well, my little pip, and I see you next week. Good night.